Well, today I'm quite interested to talk to you about what you do. So, in a sense, you're the interviewee, but it's still going to have that casual conversation feel about it. So, I'm really interested to ask you some questions today, Mike.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
If the observer feels like he's being, or she is being simply debunked, do they sometimes get upset?
Are you going to be okay with me telling you that you didn't see ET if that's the conclusion I come to? And usually they are receptive to it. And I think that's probably a good way to go about it from the start, to sort of introduce the idea like, look, 95% of the time, this isn't what it looks like. A sighting is a very personal thing. It's usually, a lot of times they're by themselves or just with one other person or something, maybe two. I mean, it's always better to have multiple witnesses, right? But regardless of how many are involved, it's a personal thing because it definitely changes you. In fact, one of my friends once introduced me to his father. Like, hey, this is my friend Mike. He works for MUFON. They're a government agency. I was like, no, we are not a government agency. Because now we got multiple people, different perspectives, presumably don't know each other, reporting the same thing independently of each other. And I think it's a good thing because anyone who's doing it is doing it for the passion or the love or whatever it is. There's no money involved in it. So you're literally sort of putting your heart and soul into it. Oh, you know what? Oh my God, yeah, thanks. I actually want to dive into this because any of you out there who are doing C5, listen up, check this out, right? There was this person who instantly started, they were nonstop, and I was like, I can't interrupt this. I can't ask it. I just started typing away as fast as I could because I was like, oh my God, I was just like, it was unloading everything, right?
Right.
And then it was trailed by a fighter jet not long after that. So, I mean, that was... I wish I would have...
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
And welcome back, one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, Meeting the Moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO Field Investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
What's shaking today, Reverend Stu?
Well, today I'm quite interested to talk to you about what you do. So, in a sense, you're the interviewee, but it's still going to have that casual conversation feel about it. So, I'm really interested to ask you some questions today, Mike.
Absolutely. Let's do it. I do want to put out a little disclaimer, though, as you might know. I've said it before, but this is an independent podcast. It's called Universal Disclosure, Meeting the Moment, under the auspices of Astral Media Productions. Has nothing to do with MUFON. I am, independent here, and I'm just putting forward my own thoughts and opinions. I'm not speaking on behalf of MUFON, but I did get sort of like the nod to be able to do a general conversation like this, and if you ask any questions that are sort of over the line, I'll just let you know. I don't think you will, but if you do, I do have an oath and a non-disclosure agreement in place. So with that said, what have you got for me?
Okay, thank you. That's fantastic. Well, first of all, could you explain to our audience what MUFON is and maybe a little bit about the history of how it evolved?
Yeah, sure. It's MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network. And it is a global nonprofit organization of civilians who volunteer, such as myself. And the mission is the scientific investigation of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. It started back in 1969. It was actually called originally the Midwest UFO Network. And then it evolved into the Mutual UFO Network. So it's come a long way since like grassroots. When Project Blue Book shut its doors in 1969, right around that same time, the Midwest UFO Network was emerging, and here we are today. Decades later, there's several thousand folks like myself around the world who are investigating UFO sightings on a daily basis, and that's kind of the nutshell version of what it is and where it came from.
Well, how does one go about becoming an investigator with MUFON, and how did you become an investigator?
Interesting question. So it was many, oh my gosh, it was like 12, 15 years ago or something, I was considering it, and oh gosh, all right, here we go. I wasn't expecting this one, but you purchase a manual, and then you study it. There's an open book test, but there's a lot of questions, and you have a couple opportunities to pass it. Not everybody passes it on the first attempt, but anyway. It's pretty extensive. It's a pretty thick book. It goes through, like, there's different chapters for different things. For example, one is specific to investigating a crash. How it's almost like a CSI investigation where you cordon off with ropes and strings and such the area in square feet, and you take all kinds of pictures. You bring your EMF meters and your Geiger counter if you have one. It's a whole thing, right? There's also another section on cattle mutilations, section on abductions. There's all kinds of stuff. So first you have to be a member, which I think is like $68 a year or something like that, not crushing. And then you purchase the materials and study it on your own. After that, you reach out to the local director, in my case, which was Earl Grey Anderson. I had gone up to meet him in person. I think it was at I want to say Alien Con in Pasadena. And I just introduced myself to him. I knew right away, like, oh my God, this guy is so warm and friendly and inviting. This is going to be awesome. So after passing the test, I reached out to him and essentially became an investigator. So I am officially a Field Investigator 3 and also a section director for the Southern California coastline. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
It does. That's fantastic. I noticed when we were interviewing Paul Hynek, who's Dr. J. Allen Hynek's son, you mentioned that some of or maybe all of the procedures, investigative procedures, were originally formed by his father.
Okay, yes. Thanks for bringing that up. I did say that. That is true, but I forgot to say something else, too. It's a combination of J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallee that comprises what I and everybody else in the organization does. They developed various protocols of things to do. So each one is very, very extensive. The most important part is actually the witness interview, which MUFON is the only organization that actually does it. There's other reporting agencies out there, but they don't reach out and interview the witness, which is a very, very important thing. And in America, the witness testimony can alone be enough to put someone in jail for their life. So, it's a very important thing. Like, you could see the most compelling video or photo, but until you talk to the person and get the backstory, where were you? What were you doing? What made you look up, kind of thing. It can go into all different roads, right? But until you get that backstory, there's only so much you can do with just analyzing, a photo or a video, as it were. So that's really one of the most important aspects of it.
All right. Well, I can tell MUFON is taken seriously, because even with some of the people we've interviewed, some high-ranking military people have spoken to MUFON about their encounters. I find that very indicative of the seriousness that's viewed with.
Yes, indeed. I mean, in some regards, in the earlier days, not to say it was the only place, but it was always like one of the best known places. But again, it's that witness interview and the interaction that happens that doesn't really happen anywhere else. Now, I mean, there's some other places that are coming out now that are sort of in partnership with us, as it were, that will happen as well. But we're at this point, we are the main, whatever you want to call it, the main place to go to.
Now, how do you end up investigating a case? A case is allocated to you by some process?
Okay, yeah. So if you can be anywhere in the world, and you go to MUFON.com, that's the main website, and right at the top it says report a sighting. Right next to that says report an abduction. There are two different things. So if you've seen something, you make a report. There's a lot of questions. and then it's a different thing if you've interacted with an entity or believe that you've been abducted essentially, or that's still, I think that's still what they call it. Now technically we're shifting now to like experiencer. It's a nicer, more neutral term, but there are two different sort of wings of it. I'm on the more nuts and bolts side of things, where I'll investigate sightings. If it's an entity involved, I do sometimes have conversations like that briefly or generally with folks, but I always tell them, like, you have to file a different report, because it ultimately goes to a different group of folks who are sort of trained in having those particular conversations. But sorry about that. To answer your question, once somebody sends in a report, no matter where they are in the world, it first, it goes into like a central location that then gets dispersed into like the local area. And from there, like in my case, it's Earl. He's state director for SoCal. He'll be assigned all the cases. Actually, our chief investigator, Gino, also helps out with that too. So one of them will then assign that particular case to whoever they think might be best suited for this particular case, or depending on what area they live in, or knowing our schedules. Like this person's already got 3 open cases. Let's not bog them down or whatever, right? So there's different variables, but the main thing is it goes first to the local folks there. Whenever possible, it's best to have someone who knows the geography of the area investigating the sighting, because they're going to know things like, oh, well, that road's got, there's a mountain on it, and there's 3 towers that are always blinking. Maybe that has something to do with what this was, right? There are situations where there's areas that do not have investigators in the area, in which case there's a separate group of folks that will then assist sort of doing it remotely. Like we pretty much do everything remotely nowadays, unless it's a crash or a landing type of case. Then there's a star team essentially gets deployed, and we go out, like I said, do that sort of crime scene investigation type of a thing.
Are there some cases where multiple investigators are involved?
Sometimes. In a way, it's kind of rare, but it sort of depends. So if we're talking about, and this is rare, I don't know that it's really happened anytime recently, but if there's a crash or landing, there's a team, a literal team, like 5, 6, 8 people, whatever, who will go out and take care of that. But as far as a standard, like, sighting case, it's usually not necessary to have more than one person involved. Sometimes I'll reach out to different team members for asking for their opinions on something or whatnot. But for the most part, we sort of work independently. I do know that there have been cases more on the abduction side that have had sort of multiple investigators involved for one reason or another. But I mean, it's all a case by case basis. The short answer is depends.
Okay, that's interesting. Are you ever requested to go interstate to help with an investigation? Now, I heard what you said about sometimes doing it remotely via Zoom, but I understand that you also occasionally go interstate for MUFON conferences as well. And at those times, do you catch up with other investigators? Do you research cases that they're looking at? Does any of that happen?
Okay, so yes and no. And as far as investigating sort of across state lines, no, because again, it's the folks in the area who are going to investigate it, unless it's a matter of a star team investigation where we need boots on the ground, like ASAP, possibly, but probably not. In terms of the MUFON symposium every year, I've gone to the last couple, and there are there's investigators from all over the country, all over the world, who I can connect with and meet up with and shoot the breeze with, and it's a lot of fun.
Wow, were you nervous the first time you had to do an investigation?
Oh yeah, I was. I mean, in a way, right? Like, with my background, without getting too much into what I do, because I have non-disclosures for that stuff too, but it wasn't too far of a stretch for me in terms of interviewing someone, right? That wasn't necessarily too far of a stretch from my life, as it were. But I was definitely nervous the first investigation that I had, and I don't think I'll ever forget that one. Earl told me that it's like, you never forget your first one, and it was a balloon, Mylar balloon. I remember that. And I, had talked to the witness and the reporting witness, and I did the whole thing. Like we set up the interview time, and sometimes it's on the phone, sometimes it's on Zoom. But I like to just Zoom better because I like to share my screen and confirm where they are on the map. Like, this is where you are, this is where you're looking, and then it helps out. And then I also like to trace out, like, what's the observed flight path, because that's all important stuff. But nonetheless, I don't know. I feel like I'm just like going all over the place here right now. Am I making any sense?
No, it's great stuff. Now, if debunking might be too strong a word, but this is the question I wanted to ask you. If the observer feels like he's being, or she is being simply debunked, do they sometimes get upset?
That has happened. Yes, it does happen. So I sort of go into it from the start by explaining that 95% of the time we can explain what this is. And we're not here to debunk or disprove or tell you didn't see what you think you saw, but we are here to get to the truth. So at some point in my interviews with folks, I will directly ask them, because sometimes I've had people say, like, I'm just reporting it, you don't need to get back to me, just wanted to let you know, put it in the system. Great. Other times people want to, they want to know what the result is, which more often than not, people actually do want to know the result. So I will ask them point blank, are you going to be okay with me telling you that you didn't see ET if that's the conclusion I come to? And usually they are receptive to it. And I think that's probably a good way to go about it from the start, to sort of introduce the idea, like, look, 95% of the time, this isn't what it looks like. And, it sort of softens the blow, as it were, if because it's a sighting is a very personal thing. It's usually, a lot of times they're by themselves or just with one other person or something, maybe two. I mean, it's always better to have multiple witnesses, right? But regardless of how many are involved, it's a personal thing because it definitely changes you. And even if it was something that was mundane, they could still have a mild changing, just be opened up suddenly to the idea that, like, there's some other weird stuff. No, I shouldn't say weird stuff, but there's other stuff going on that needs investigation.
Yeah, well, it certainly might be weird from their perspective. Now, do some of these people that come to you seek anonymity? Do they want to keep their names private? What happens there?
Yes. So that happens quite well. Here's the thing. Anyone who reports to MUFON is always anonymous, in that we never release any information about their identity or exact location. Now, sometimes there are people, primarily with the more, like, on the experiencer side, who will decide on their own to maybe come forward publicly, but that's a whole different thing. But from anyone's perspective who's reporting, whether they want to be anonymous or not, we never reveal that, but we do have a box where you can check to be anonymous, in which case, then we still need to know your contact information and your name, what to call you, right? But for the most part, and it's not even for the most part, that's just the way it is. Everything is confidential, essentially.
All right, now my next question is a bit sensitive, and I mean it respectfully. Do people ever question the motives of MUFON, and do they wonder if there are any intelligence connections to it? And are there any connections to the intelligence community?
So that has come up a couple times, actually, and it's a legitimate question. I'm only speaking from my own experiences and my own, what do you call it, thoughts or ideas, right? But, I mean, the answer is no. We're not connected to any government agency whatsoever, okay? But there are sometimes people who think, in fact, one of my friends once introduced me to his father, like, hey, this is my friend Mike, he works for MUFON, they're a government agency. I was like, no, we are not a government agency. So, I mean, there's some misconceptions, I think, for sure. And some people have said that, they didn't even know that they could reach out to us. So then they've held something inside for years and then finally reached out because they weren't aware that we were essentially so reachable or contactable, and we are. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. That was fantastic. Okay, I'm starting to get a picture of how this works now. So some people, they just want to log their sightings or accounts as a way of collating data then.
Oh, okay, yeah. So in part, but actually, let me finish the other part because this is known and it's been publicly stated a number of times that as of recently, MUFON does meet with Congress in Washington. I believe they meet in a skiff every quarter, and they go over some of the cases of interest, as it were. And the reason for that is because we have the biggest. Database of civilian database at least of what's been going on. Like my most recent case is I know 138,000 something, and that's just the digital ones. That's not including the ones that were before the internet. So there's a hell of a lot of information that we've collected. So that could potentially misconstrue someone to think that we're like part of the government or something. But even then, like everything is anonymous, and they only share information about like these are cases of interest. Like a triangle was seen in Pasadena in August 1st, 2023, or something like that. That's pretty much the extent of it. But the fact that Congress is interested in it is a fantastic thing. So I forgot what the question that you just asked was.
Oh, that's right. I was just making an observation about the fact that some people simply want to log their sightings as a way to help correlate data points. And that leads me to this next question. I've heard this expression UFO flap, and I think I've heard you mention that. What does that mean?
Okay, yeah. So if I could just go back to that other thing first. A lot of times, and it's not necessarily people just report it for the sake of it. Like sometimes it's pretty rare. And honestly, I think when they say that, in my course of talking and asking them questions, they begin to realize like, oh, I now understand what this is, and it wasn't an ET, so they were maybe kind of saving face or whatever. That's my personal opinion, and no worries about that because it happens. Like people misidentify stuff all the time, planets, stars, sometimes aircraft. It might sound silly, but it happens. And when you see some of these videos, you can absolutely understand why that would be misidentified. But anyways, I think a lot of people, for the most part, their main motivation to reach out is because they want to know, was this ET or not, essentially. And they're, I don't know, validation isn't necessarily the right word, but they want confirmation. Like, did I see what I think I saw? And that's the main motivation, I think, for most people's reports.
All right. So if some people have seen something that you're already aware of as an organization, will you reveal to them, yes, Stuart, we've had a bunch of accounts of this. So does that then motivate those people to contact those other people or want to compare notes with the other experiences? How does that work?
Okay, so I feel like I should have answered your other question first too about the UFO flap, because that's a great question. So a flap is it's an old timey term, I guess. I don't really know where it came from, honestly, but what it means is like it's like a wave. Like nothing really happened these past couple of weeks or whatever, and then all of a sudden we got 20 reports in the same couple of days. That's what a flap is called. So it's that's what that is. In terms of like if there have been times that I've investigated cases. Now, one of the things that we do, and maybe I'll sort of go through all the things we do, but one of the things that we do is look at if there's other reports for the same day in the same location. And it's always, it's rare, but it does happen. And when it happens, it's just like, ooh, I perk up a little bit more like, wow, because now we got multiple people, different perspectives, presumably don't know each other, reporting the same thing independently of each other. In which case I have shared notes with other investigators because a lot of times, and I think maybe by design, those will be assigned to different investigators so they can do their own thing. And then, compare notes, as it were, just like you were saying, to see, different themes or motifs, I believe is the word that you would use.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it might cross state lines. Perhaps someone's seen something in a neighboring state, and then it also appears up a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes later in another state. Now, is that kind of data correlation actioned or investigated?
It is, yeah. So on that end, perhaps an important note is regardless of where you live, your investigation gets assigned to investigator in the area of where it happened. I have talked to people in other time zones who were visiting California at the time of their sighting, and because I'm here, I end up calling them and doing an interview there, or maybe they've moved away or whatever. But I don't want to keep saying, does that answer your question? But I mean, does that?
No, that's fine. Now, another thing I'm interested to know is this 100% volunteer for you? Do MUFON investigators, is there any remunerative aspect? Do you make money from this, or how does it work?
It is 100% volunteer. I make zero. Nobody in the organization makes any money. It's 100% volunteer. And I mean, I don't want to scare anybody off. In a way, there's a little bit of a small investment to make too, right? So, and I think it's a good thing, because anyone who's doing it is doing it for the passion or the love or whatever it is. There's no money involved in it. So you're literally sort of putting your heart and soul into it. What's the investment part? Well, there's the training material. It's a one-time fee for that. But then, I've purchased gear that I don't necessarily need at this moment in time, but I just did. But then there's also like different like flight radar services and other historical information services that you potentially would need. Now, not everybody does that or is in a position to do that, so I will help other folks from time to time, like, somebody needs a flight radar snapshot or whatever, from just give me the date, time, location, and I'll do it and send it your way. But yeah, there's no pay whatsoever.
Okay, well, you must have some travel expenses sometimes, and your time. So I really respect that you're doing that for the community.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally, mostly for like the events and such, it would be travel expenses or meetings. However, with my setup, but also even regardless of my setup, that's a legitimate tax deduction, because it's a volunteering for a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
Oh, it's good to hear. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there is a benefit to that as well. Some people might not realize that, but it's legit.
Okay, now I'm not asking you to profile people here exactly, but I do want to know, is there a certain type of person that comes forward with these observations?
No. In fact, I've been, I don't know what the word is, with the different folks that I've talked to have mostly been people that I would never expect to be talking to, like really respectable professional people in one way or another. I've talked to former law enforcement officers, former military members, doctors, professionals, and I've also talked to what I'll call like lay people, right? But it's across the board. And when we talked to Mary Radwell, I believe she had mentioned that as well, and she had made a really nice statement where, like, it doesn't matter what people believe, and that's very important, because regardless of whether you believe in it or not, if it's going to happen to you, it's going to happen to you. So that's a pretty interesting thing. Awesome.
I'm glad you brought up about beliefs there, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was, to what extent do an observer's beliefs affect what they're seeing, and how much does it affect your analysis of a case? How much do your beliefs affect the case?
Well, I mean, I can't really speak for the witnesses per se. However, there is sometimes a bias. There's been some folks that I've talked to that are just open to whatever they want to know. Was it not? And then there's other folks, and now we're going to get into a sticky situation here, but it is what it is. Like the CE5 protocol by Dr. Stephen Greer is a really big. Oh, you know what? Oh my God, yeah, thanks. I actually want to dive into this, because any of you out there who are doing CE5, listen up, check this out, right? Yeah, so what'll happen, if for those who don't know, it's a protocol to basically, it's a meditation that you do, and you sort of like project your consciousness out into the far reaches of space to sort of call in a non-human entity. Allegedly some people can do it. I have yet to see anything really compelling that sort of proves that, but I'm open to the concept. I can see how it potentially works, but I've not yet seen any satisfactory things. But what I'm trying to say is, a lot of times people will, it happens quite frequently actually, well, they'll do one of these meditations, and then if either they're outside or they go outside after the fact, whatever the case may be, and then they'll see something. Now you're already in the mindset of, calling in the ET and everything. So your brain is sort of wired, as it were, to search for the UFO. There's been a couple cases where people reported seeing something immediately after the CE5, and I was like, okay, well, to me that looks like a satellite, and when I go to the star map, there was a single Starlink satellite going across this exact area of the sky. That's what it was. And then from there, maybe they'll accept it and maybe they won't. And I don't, that's all I can do is like, this is what it is. But to that end, for anyone who does that, an important thing to do is, whenever possible, get a point of reference with your video. And what do I mean by that? It could be a tree line or the top of a building or something that we can see where we are. And also, hold your camera completely steady. Don't move it around like this. Hold the darn thing steady, especially with that point of reference. Because now if I can see a point of reference that isn't moving, and then something in the sky is moving, I know that it's not the camera moving around in a weird way. It's the thing. So that's an important part, because like if you're looking at a light in the sky at night and there's nothing but black and then a dot, how do I know that you might move the camera just a little bit, not even realizing it, and then it makes the thing look like it's moving. So that's something to put out there. And also, make sure you geotag your videos when you're doing that kind of thing, so we can know exactly. Because there was one, sort of compelling case that I did recently of this nature, that we didn't know exactly where they were. So I had to conclude insufficient data because I couldn't cross-reference anything at all. Like they're somewhere out in the desert, which is ginormous, and interesting lights that are really doing some interesting things, but I don't know where you are, so I can't confirm if that's an airplane or a light on a tower or something. So I mean, if you really want to give us that proof, follow those tips, and hopefully we can maybe get to the bottom of that. I would love to see, absolutely love to see, proof undeniable from a CE5, like something really cool happen, but I've yet to see it.
Now, that protocol of CE5 is referred to as an invocation in esoteric circles, ceremonial magic, Enochian magic. So that's why this topic tends to border into esotericism. And, people have got different opinions on that. So that definitely borders into people's belief systems. I can see how that's an aspect of what you're describing there. And people come with these preconceived ideas. I mean, I do too. I'm not saying this from a place of judgment. I've got ideas or thought forms that help me navigate this reality as to what's real and what's not real, but I'm open to change. But I think I heard you say before that these sightings that people have can change their belief systems or perspectives on this reality. So I imagine you see that, and maybe some of these people are a bit stressed out, are they, when they're telling you about these incidents they've observed?
Yeah, I don't know that stress would be the word I would use. Excited, definitely. And when I say that's what I mean by that is eager to speak, because a lot of times, whether it just happened 2 days ago or 10 years ago, more often than not, it starts off with, I've never told anybody this, which I think that you mentioned in our first episode too. So, because they don't want their friends or family to like, oh, you're crazy, like whatever. I totally get it. But they sort of keep it to themselves. So it's that's one of the things I do too is, I record all the conversations, but only temporarily, and that's one of the sort of requirements, as it were. But we also ask for the recorded approval of the person to record the conversation. And the reason is you never know where the conversation is going to go. I used to start off shooting the breeze with the folks, get them used to me, and then ask if I could record it. But man, the one time that I did, there was there was this person who instantly started, they were nonstop, and I was like, I can't interrupt this. I can't ask it. I just started typing away as fast as I could because I was like, oh my God, I was just like, it was unloading everything. And it ended, that was ended up being an unidentified thing of, this person was out in the desert and it was the middle of the day. There was no cars around, even though there should have been. And there was this I think it was a 300-yard circular craft of sorts that they could see through. And I was like, well, if you could see through it, how'd you know it was there? Well, they could see the defined edges, right?
Right.
And then it was trailed by a fighter jet not long after that. So, that was, I wish I would have asked the recording question right from the start. So ever since then, I was just like, before we get started, my first question is, are you okay? And then, if it's a mundane thing, I just, delete it right away. If it's an unknown, I will transcribe the interview just so it's in print, but then the voice and the identity is not there. And then I destroy it, whatever. But I don't know how I got off on that tangent. What were we even talking about?
That was good. That was all good. As you were talking, I realized that it's important as an investigator not to bring an air of skepticism, because otherwise whoever's talking to you is just going to close up, aren't they?
So everything is open mind. It's not like I ask the same questions all the time, but there's certain questions that I always start it with okay, where were you? What were you doing? What made you look up? Open-ended questions. And, go from there. I never want to ask a leading question, because I don't want to ask a question that somebody thinks they want. I want them to say something. I don't want them to say anything. I want you to tell me in your own words what the hell happened, and in a very neutral way. So sometimes I will, like right now, I'm pondering for my words, and I'll just be because I want to ask them a question, but I want to ask it in a way that it's not a yes or no. It's not like they think that I want them to say something. It's just a very open, like for example, where did it go? And not so did you see it disappear? Did you see a flight? No. It's an open-ended question. Where did it go? And that makes them think. And then, not that they really need to think; they're just recalling, right? But I don't want to give away all my secrets.
That's good. I like that. Do MUFON sometimes get inundated with so many sightings that you have trouble allocating investigators to? I'm
not sure. In SoCal here, we have a pretty large team. There's about 12 of us investigating. Wow. It's a large area too. Now, on average, in the state of California, on average, we get 60-ish cases per month. But that's divided by north and south. So on a global average, we're 7,000 to 8,000 a year. But again, 95% of them are explainable. However, as Paul Hynek said, that 5% might not sound like a lot, but when you have 139,000 of them, that 5% is a pretty freaking big deal.
Fantastic. Do you get people making repeat reports, or do they tend to be just one-off?
Okay, well, can you clarify that question, because it could mean two different things.
Okay, good stuff. So I initially meant, do you have someone who reports something 1 year and then 5 years later you hear from the same person? I've seen something else, Mike, I'd like to report.
Okay, yes, that does happen. The other way I could interpret that is someone's reporting the same sighting multiple times, which rarely, but sometimes happens. But sometimes, occasionally it will happen where somebody will make a report and then make another report of a different event, and it's I don't know how to say this the right way. If it's years apart, sort of not a big deal, right? It does happen where, now for most people, it's a one-time thing. They see something and it happens once in life. But there's other people who do sort of consistently, not on a regular basis, but a long time in between, will see something and report it. For me, the red flag is if they're reporting something every month. Or I'm talking to them and say, I see these things every day. I was okay. I mean, not out of the question, right? I mean, we had the Tic Tacs showed up for what 10 or 11 or 12 days or something like that, and recently. Langley put out a statement. There are these, let's call them drones, whatever, were for 17 days last year over the airbase. So, I mean, the Langley thing, I don't know what I think about it. Like, is it a drone? Maybe. But then whose is it? Because the drones that we have here, you can't go anywhere near an airport, let alone a military installation. Like, they hit like this invisible brick wall and they get sent back home. So whose drones are they that can just... But anyway, I digress. I don't want to get into that conversation. But the point is, like, if someone's seeing something... I had a couple cases like that where... I love the desert cases too. I was out in the desert, there's not a lot going on there, and there were these lights appearing like every night at the same time. And I was like, well, that sounds more like human than ET, because ET doesn't really respect our times, right? That one ended up being closed as military flares. But nonetheless, it's sort of a red flag if someone's reporting too often. I don't know if it. I don't know where the break line is between too often and not too often, but you just you kind of feel it out in a way.
That makes complete sense, yeah, because you've got to perhaps look at the motive of the person making the reports. And in most instances, I'm guessing they're legitimate, but I don't know because this is new to me.
So, yeah, I mean, again, the main motivation for people is that they want to know from someone like who's really into it and investigating it, like, did they see what was this thing, right? Can you tell me what it was? And go from there. I forgot what I was going to say, though. Okay, occasionally, it's rare, but it happens. We get hoaxes from time to time, and those are usually pretty obvious. I'm not going to say how we know, but yeah, that happens from time to time. But again, they're usually legitimate, even if they're mundane things. Like, I can understand why someone might mistake that for something phenomenal or fantastical, because you're at the right time at the right place with the right conditions, that this mundane thing occurred that looked pretty freaking wild. I get it, but that's why we're here.
Okay, so this is a bit of a personal question for you. Now, you started this podcast, which you invited me to co-host, which I was greatly honored to be invited. Thank you, Mike, and I've been absolutely loving it. Now, how did the inspiration for the podcast start, and was it related to your work as a MUFON investigator? Is there a connection?
I don't know the answer to that, Stuart. I truly don't.
Wow.
How it started, is there? I don't know. I mean, there's got to be some connection. I don't know. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for that one.
No, I like that. That was an honest answer. Now, we've had conversations off air, so I know some of the answers to these questions, but I'm partly asking for the audience, and please feel free not to go there if you don't want to, but...
absolutely. I'll cut you off if I feel the need.
Yeah, you're doing the editing. So now, in the spirit of this podcast, we generally ask the guests, what's their spiritual journey? Now, do you mind if I ask what's been your spiritual journey, and has it been impacted by this research you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. Impacted, yes. And so I was raised as Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy for, probably all the time. That's from the youngest to the oldest that you could be one, because it was, my family was really into church, but not so much so that they were like, wonky about it, right? They were like a normal family, but they were also very, very religious and spiritual. So around the time that I stopped being an altar boy and I would just go to church for the sake of it, I distinctly remember, like, I was there. This might sound, so I don't mean to offend anybody, but I was in the congregation, and I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of like a cult. I mean, everyone's here, coming in. Some people are participating, some people are not, but there's like this call and response thing going on, and like, what's going on? Like, from the time I was a kid until now, like, nothing changed. It's a ritual that repeats, and nothing progressed really. So I sort of stopped going to church, and then I would spend like for a long, long time, I would go like every Sunday, I would go out somewhere in nature, do a hike or something like that, and spend a good amount of time in nature. And that was sort of my church, right? Just by myself and admiring the beauty of Earth. And then I was starting to think about these greater questions in life. And in fact, I remember my mom at one point, I think it was towards the end of her life, told me that when I was young, my teachers would tell my parents, like, he's going to be a deep thinker. He's always like, because I remember I was always like, writing down whatever they were saying or on the blackboard or whatever. But I was always like literally looking up, and like in a day, it's like hearing what they're saying, but not really hearing what they're saying, thinking about what I wanted to think about. Right. And I was somewhere else. So it was sort of natural for me to explore the larger questions of life. And ironically enough, what I'm discovering in this whole process with you, Stuart, is a lot of the things that I have sort of concluded on my own independently seem to be very similar to your Gnostic ways, as it were. I don't know what to make of that, but that's, as I've been talking to you and other people who we've been talking to, that, there's these common threads. And I was like, yeah, I kind of, thought that or discovered that a while ago. And now it's sort of coming back into play. And it's pretty darn interesting, I think. So I don't know if that... so then, with the idea that aliens exist too. Originally, I don't know if we were rewounded back before the Catholic Church came out essentially saying it's okay to believe in them, I think that would probably have rocked my world more than it did or does.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they're coming out publicly, being open about it and saying it's okay to go along with that. I don't know, I feel like I'm babbling again.
No, that was fantastic. And I really appreciate your open-hearted answer with that. Thank you, Mike. That was really interesting. It's been an interesting journey for me too, doing this podcast, because I get to hear perspectives from other people too, which is really informing. So I'm on this journey too, along with the viewers of the show.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's been plenty of times when, especially more like in the debriefs or before our debriefs, where, we'll share stuff privately, and you're right there like, oh my gosh, I didn't consider that, or I'm gonna look more into this other thing, and that's what it's all about. I mean, it goes back to when I went to private school pretty much all my life. In the high school I went to was an all boys school, college prep or whatever, and my religion teacher, I'll never forget. He's like, it was one of the first days as a freshman, like, gentlemen, question everything, even what I'm telling you right now. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions. And that's how I was sort of brought up, of sort of don't trust, verify type of mentality.
That's so important. And I really see that as a scientific approach, like testing the hypothesis. I really respect that person said that to you.
Yeah, and a religion teacher at a Catholic school, nonetheless. After that class, like, all of my classmates, I was like, "Oh my God, that's totally cool." He's like, question him too. Like, yeah, like what is this school all about?
That's fantastic.
It's pretty wild.
Do you have any other general thoughts on MUFON as an organization, or your role in that organization, that you can share with us, please?
I'm not sure really what you mean by that. I mean, I think it's
just
great.
Commentary on your experience. Are they treating you well? That kind of thing. Do you feel well supported as an investigator?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they welcomed me with open arms. Absolutely. Everyone that I've encountered is very smart. They take it very seriously, and they're very open and fostering. Like, we have team meetings every month that are private, just between the team, and then there's also like monthly meetings and such too. But I find myself texting. In fact, this evening I'm going out to dinner with one of the people on our team too. So we'll text or email back and forth, just like general stuff in life, or sometimes we'll share cases or whatever. But it's as corny as it's going to sound. It's really kind of like a family environment or atmosphere where everyone is sort of welcomed, and we just shoot the breeze whenever we can. I mean, it's it's really great. And between Earl and Gino here in SoCal, there's a lot of support, especially when I was new. I was emailing Earl. I got to one point. I was like, "I'm so sorry," and he's like, "No." He was welcoming of it and supportive of it because because there's a little bit of a mentorship that happens originally with anyone who comes in. I totally took advantage of that, probably more than I should have, but it's been fantastic. I've learned quite a bit, and at every case I do, I still learn new things, and never stop learning.
Now, you'll notice during a lot of our interviews that I'll ask whether the person we're interviewing has any artistic proclivities, tendencies. Are they artists, Now, I know that you are because that's how we met. And I also know from interviewing Earl Grey that he is. Is that a theme among MUFON investigators as well? Are they artistic people?
Interesting question. Probably 50-50. So, Earl's a musician, Gino's a musician. CJ, I think, has some artist to her. But then there's other folks who are very, very much more scientific, like PhD in aerospace, a former police detective, or a current private investigator, that kind of thing. So it's a really good mix, actually, of backgrounds. Interesting question, and I'm going to ponder that a little more over these next couple of days and see if I can make some connections of sorts. It's pretty darn interesting, actually.
Now, when I ask that question of guests, I'm not coming from the perspective of, okay, you're an artist, you're just making things up, you're just extrapolating, using your creative mind. I don't mean that. I'm not inferring that. I'm meaning, are you used to pulling information from the ether, inspiration, on songwriting, dance, painting? Are you already connected to that side of reality? That's where I'm heading to.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. There's maybe something I want to say that I'm not going to say at this point, but there's something. I don't want to be like cagey or anything like that, but there's something to that. Like, we'll just leave it at that for now.
I love that. Maybe that's for another episode down the track. Because I told you in the past, I'm actually very interested in these themes or motifs because they're quite informing. So if there's a preponderance of a certain people with a certain cultural background, a certain blood type, I know that comes up, artistic leanings, it's just an indicator, it's just a metric. And I'm sort of storing them in the back of my mind, and they help me on this journey to understand what's happening.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, just pondering it right now, it's probably about 50-50 in terms of, artistry versus full-on and only scientific-minded people. I think it's probably about 50-50. But it's still pretty interesting. What I didn't, I don't know, what I'm dancing around, right, is, when someone new joins our team, if they are only scientific minded, they might have a little harder of a time with some of the more esoteric sides of this stuff. I think is a good way to put it. With I don't know, with practice, I guess, right? It becomes more palatable for those folks, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I can understand where you're heading. Yeah, this is really interesting. This is brand new to me. Okay, that makes sense because I know from some scientific people that I'm associated with or friends even, they can be quite closed off, certainly to religion and as an extension, any kind of type of spirituality. So they've just shut that aspect down of the equation for them, and I respect that. I respect what they're doing. But I understand what you're getting at here because disclosure, as we've noticed from our own experience in talking to these guests, has a level of this esotericism involved. So I would assert that certain investigators may hit a brick wall or a dead end if they're not open to exploring that aspect. Now, I know for sure that Dr. Vallee is open to that aspect of it, and by the sounds of it, Dr. J. Allen Hynek were. So these are some of the people who are prominent who either are or were prominent in this type of investigation, and it's certainly where the trail has led for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's an interesting thing, because I've met sort of both sides of that equation, in terms of like the full science mind that is open to esoteric and that's not necessarily closed off to it, but doesn't know how to maybe process that kind of thing. I don't know if...
Well, that's why you'll notice sometimes with the esoteric guests, I'll ask them, and I don't want to become standardized in my questions either, so I try and keep it to a limit. But I'll say, have you been approached by the military-industrial complex for your perspective on these issues? And I'm surprised by how often they either answer, yes, I have, or I know someone who has. And the reason I was asking those questions was because I was already aware of that connection too. So that shows me that the military or aerospace are asking similar questions to what we're asking, because otherwise they wouldn't bother speaking to those people.
Exactly, yeah. As we have sort of discovered with some of our more recent conversations, specifically with Reverend David Perry, about the esoteric side of things, like some of those, one of the founders of JPL, right, Parsons, and some of his other cohorts, they were very, very much into this esoteric thing or idea, or probably not saying that right, but the point is, there's a lot of space missions that are named after some of the different sky gods, as it were, right? And you got to ask yourself why that is.
Yeah, that was covered in Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka's most recent book, and I'd absolutely love to have her as a guest at some point. She is a scholar, much like Dr. Joanna Kiawa, who does this kind of research and finding these threads. These threads have always been there, Mike. See, that's why some of these esoteric people, like the Grand Master of the Templars, is coming forward with this information, I believe, at this time. So it's just the conversation is becoming bigger and bigger and broader, and it can be difficult for people to navigate. And I guess that's what's happening when people come to MUFON. They're trying to navigate these same questions, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting, especially in like a in-person setting, right? Like whether it's a conference or just a an in-person meeting and whatnot. There's multiple of those that sort of happen, right? I'm finding that it doesn't matter how old the person is, right, or what their background is. If they're going there in person for the first time, they all sort of have either the same questions or the same postulations or whatnot, and the information's out there, right? I mean, we're certainly not breaking any news here, as it were, but we're going about it in a different way, I think. But it's almost like everybody goes down the same path, and I've observed that with different aspects of my life, like the musician aspect of it. People will pick up an instrument and sort of go down the same path, or at one point I was part of various trading groups, and the newbies, you could always tell coming in, they have their preconceived ideas. They're going to make like $1 million in the next 2 months and retire. Like everybody goes through the same kind of learning curve, and with those other two examples, most of them don't make it, right? But what the beauty of with this conversation is there is no such thing as failure. It's just a matter of understanding what it is and being open to expanding your mind, as it were, right?
Right. You're talking about a receptivity or openness to explore this in all its facets. Now, I should state here that I am an ordained reverend, a Christian minister. So I am actually not just seeing this from the esoteric side. I'm open to the nuts and bolts side too. Some people might be surprised to hear. Now, I realize I bring some esoteric guests on here, and I love that because they're the kind of circles I move in. But I'm still open to the nuts and bolts side of this equation.
I love that. I love that about you, Stuart.
Thank you.
No, but for real, that's awesome. And I do like the esoteric guests that you've brought into the conversation. They're all wonderful.
Yeah, because it's a two-sided coin. You know, we've got left hemisphere, right hemisphere, so you can't really analyze this without both
Mhm.
sides. And it's the same if you're, I presume, if you're doing an investigation. There's what did you see and what did you feel. You need both sides of that investigation.
Yeah, exactly. Without really going into detail, there's certain questions that I will ask that people aren't expecting, and I like to ask them because it brings out important information, but it also they're always surprised by them, and I'm just like, yeah, this is like a whole nother level of this conversation that you weren't expecting we were going to have.
I think you're an easy person to talk to, Mike. I love that about you, by the way. And I reckon you would put
Thank
people
you.
at ease, which would result in them opening up further than they perhaps would with somebody else.
I don't know what to say other than thank you, but I guess I will say this. I was surprised and continually am surprised at how much someone will open up to me when I'm just talking to them for the first time. And it's honorable and I love it. Um, but it's, yeah, I don't know. Uh, I'm surprised at some of the stuff that people confide in me about, and whether it's sometimes it has to do with the investigation, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we'll talk about other stuff after the official conversation or the formal conversation is done, and sometimes they will maybe even keep in contact with me, and I'm totally fine with that too, because it's we're all on this journey together, and you know.
Okay, so did you notice that about yourself even prior to becoming a MUFON investigator?
Did I notice what about myself?
That aspect that people are willing to talk to you and open up to you, even if you've just met them, do people tend to open up to you in general in your life?
Okay, so I don't know necessarily about strangers, but I've always been the guy that people go to when they need someone to talk to,
Oh, wow.
um, all my life. And at one point, I had a fairly large circle of friends. I thought, like, I'm not talking about like the internet style, like 500 or 1,000 friends. I'm talking like 10 or 15 people that I would sort of hang out with on a regular, and it got to be too much because someone was always having drama, and I was always like going somewhere or talking to somebody, and it was just like just listening or trying to help out. But so I guess, yeah, in a way, my entire life has sort of been kind of like that. Not sure why.
That's fascinating. You're a good listener, and I'm realizing as you're telling me that that's an important aspect of being an investigator.
It is. So somebody else mentioned that who I hold in high regard, and I appreciate hearing that. Active listening is one of the most important parts, well, of any interview, really, but especially of like an ET possible interview, because you need to listen to what people are saying in order to then ask another relevant question. I mean, because people are reaching out to talk, not to listen, right? So, like this is my talking outlet right here. Okay. Aside from this, I mostly just listen, right? Even in my regular, in my regular day, I take a lot of actions too, but I'm primarily listening. That's what I do. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right?
Well, the gift of really listening to another person and focusing on them and giving them your quality time is a beautiful thing. And I think people recognize when that's happening and perhaps feel more comfortable and likely to open up about sensitive topics.
That's probably true and correct. And I don't know why I talk the way I do sometimes. That's probably true and correct. But that's just me, right? So laugh at me, whatever. It's all good. But pretty much, I don't think any investigation has gone by where I didn't get a thank you at the end. And at the end, I don't have the conclusion, by the way. It's just like, I do preliminary work, then we do the interview, and then I do more work after that. But people have all the time. They thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not laughing at me. Like thank you for something always comes out. And that's perhaps one of the most rewarding parts, is to know that no matter what the result is, I've helped someone in some way.
Mike, that's so beautiful. I'm realizing that the role you and I play is quite similar. That there's an overlap. in what we're doing for people, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think there is. Sometimes when the investigation's happening, there's not like a specific time frame, right? But they usually take several days, maybe a week, or even longer than that sometimes. And what'll happen is, after the interview, I'll still send follow-up questions or whatever. Or sometimes the folks will reach out to me about whether something's related to the case or unrelated to the case. And there's certain something when someone's reaching out, especially if it's outside of the case. I think that's even more powerful in a way that they would even want my opinion on it. And it's very, I don't know if humbling is the right word, but it's a really powerful experience.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, I feel like we're winding up a bit now, Mike, and I really want to thank you and honor you for the role you're playing in individual people's lives and in this disclosure movement. And once again, I want to express my gratitude for having me along as your friend and co-host. So much love to you, my friend. Thank you for this time together.
Right back at you, Stuart. I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I said, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't with you. And I'm glad that you're along on this journey with me. And I look forward to our next episode coming out real soon, right? So Stuart, our visual audience just witnessed us morph from our podcast T-shirts to full dress again. What's that all about, man?
I'm guessing it means that we're having a guest around pretty soon.
Yes, indeed. And I think it was last episode with Stephen Bassett, you mentioned a possible disclosure gift under the Christmas tree. And I believe that you were maybe alluding to our great grand finale of the season, episode number 25, coming up, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you said grand finale there, because the guest we have coming up is Timothy Hogan, the Grand Master of the Order of the Knights Templar.
It's going to be fantastic. We've been planning it for a little bit now. There's some extra production things that are going into it. And I think it's a great way to end off season 1. Now, with that said, we're already planning season 2. We will be back in the new year. And we're not done yet, because we're coming right back in just 2 weeks with that grand finale episode. So with that said, thank you as always for your likes, comments, subscribes, and shares. And please do keep them coming. We do have probably over 50 hours of bingeable listening over the holiday season as you're traveling by airplane, bus, or car to see your loved ones for the holidays. So when you got downtime, folks, do check out all the episodes that you missed.
That's a great idea, Mike, because this information we're covering here is highly pertinent and very current. So it's well worth getting up to speed on this information.
It absolutely is. So we'll see you back here real soon. And until then,